There is something about America in the 1940s that captures a generation's defining moment. The sacrifice, the unity, the sense that ordinary people were doing extraordinary things. And if someone lived through it, they know exactly what made that decade so unforgettable. This was a time when America was transformed by a war. Young men shipped off to Europe and the Pacific. Women took over factory floors. Families planted victory gardens and saved tin cans for the war effort. The entire nation operated with a single purpose. This was the decade that gave us the greatest generation, swing music, Rosie the Riveter, and the beginning of the American century. The Depression had ended, but rationing meant sacrifice continued. By the decade's end, soldiers returned home, suburbs started spreading, and a baby boom was underway. Living in America meant navigating war, then peace, then building a future that seemed brighter than ever before. Let's walk through what daily life actually felt like during that unforgettable decade. Some of this might bring back memories. Some of it reveals how different things were just 80 years ago. Let's step into that world. Homes in America during the 1940s reflected both the constraints of wartime and the optimism that followed. Early in the decade, families made do with what they had. New construction nearly stopped as materials went to the war effort. Families doubled up, with multiple generations sharing modest houses. The typical American home was smaller than today, often under 1,200 square feet. Rooms served multiple purposes. The living room centered around the radio console, a large piece of furniture that anchored family life. Families gathered around it each evening, the way later generations would gather around television. Kitchens were functional spaces, with ice boxes still common in many homes. The electric refrigerator was becoming standard, but not universal. Linoleum floors were popular because they were practical and easy to clean. Countertops were often covered in patterned oilcloth. Wallpaper with floral patterns decorated bedrooms. Furniture was solid and meant to last. People did not replace things frequently. A dining room set might serve a family for decades. Quality mattered because replacement was difficult. After the war, everything changed. The housing shortage became acute as millions of servicemen returned. Levittown and similar developments began transforming farmland into suburbs. These small, affordable homes represented the American dream for young families starting fresh. The automobile defined American freedom, but the 1940s complicated that relationship. When the war began, car production stopped entirely. Factories that had made Chevrolets and Fords now made tanks and aircraft. No new civilian cars were manufactured from 1942 to 1945. Gasoline rationing meant most Americans received only 3 or 4 gallons per week. An A sticker on the windshield indicated basic rations. Those with B or C stickers had jobs deemed essential and received more. People carpooled out of necessity, not environmentalism. Pleasure driving was discouraged and sometimes prohibited. Families kept their pre-war cars running through ingenuity and prayer. Mechanics became essential community figures. Tires were nearly impossible to find, so people drove carefully to preserve what they had. Speed limits dropped to 35 miles per hour to conserve rubber and fuel. When the war ended, Americans rushed to buy new cars. The 1946 models were essentially warmed over 1942 designs, but people did not care. Having a new car meant the war was truly over. By the late 1940s, families were driving again. Road trips resumed. The love affair with the automobile reignited. Before we continue with the music and culture that shaped the decade, if you are enjoying this look back at how Americans really lived and want to explore more decades and moments from the past, consider subscribing. There are so many more stories about the people and times that built the America we know today. The war effort touched every aspect of daily life. Rationing affected food, clothing, and household goods. Sugar, coffee, meat, butter, and canned goods all required ration stamps. Families learned to plan meals around what was available. Recipes were adjusted to use substitute ingredients. Victory gardens appeared in backyards, vacant lots, and city parks. By 1944, nearly 20 million Americans were growing their own vegetables. Children helped tend tomatoes and beans. The produce supplemented rationed goods, and it made families feel they were contributing. Women transformed the workforce. With men overseas, women took jobs in shipyards, aircraft factories, and steel mills. Rosie the Riveter became a national symbol. Women who had never worked outside the home learned to weld, rivet, and operate heavy machinery. They proved they could do work previously reserved for men. War bonds drove constant campaigns. Movie stars promoted them. Children collected coins at school. Buying bonds was patriotic duty. The money funded the war while giving families a stake in victory. Scrap drives collected metal, rubber, and paper. Children gathered old pots, tires, and newspapers. Nothing was wasted. The collective effort created unity that many would remember as the best of America. Music provided escape and comfort throughout the decade. Big band swing dominated the early 1940s. Glenn Miller, Benny Goodman, and Tommy Dorsey filled dance halls and airwaves. Young people danced the jitterbug with athletic enthusiasm that scandalized some older Americans. The Andrews Sisters harmonized on Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy and other hits that captured the wartime spirit. Bing Crosby's White Christmas, released in 1942, became the best-selling single of all time. Frank Sinatra emerged as the first teen idol, causing young women to swoon and scream. Radio was the center of home entertainment. Families gathered each evening to listen together. Jack Benny, Bob Hope, and George Burns provided comedy. The Shadow and the Lone Ranger delivered adventure. Soap operas entertained homemakers during daytime hours. News came through radio as well. Edward R. Murrow's broadcast from London brought the war into American living rooms. Families huddled around the radio for updates on battles, victories, and losses. When President Roosevelt delivered fireside chats, the nation listened together. By the late 1940s, television was emerging. Sets were expensive and programming limited. Families lucky enough to own one often had neighbors crowding into their living rooms to watch. The future of entertainment was visible, though radio remained dominant. Shopping in the 1940s meant navigating shortages and ration books. Department stores like Macy's, Marshall Field's, and J.C. Penney remained anchors of retail, but the selection was limited during wartime. Nylon stockings disappeared entirely when the material went to parachutes. Women painted seam lines on their legs to simulate stockings. Clothing reflected both patriotism and practicality. The War Production Board limited fabric use, so skirts became shorter and narrower. Men's suits lost cuffs and extra pockets. Victory suits used less wool. Women's fashion featured padded shoulders and practical designs suitable for work. After the war, consumer goods returned. Families who had saved money during rationing now had cash to spend. Appliances that had been unavailable became must-have items. Washing machines, vacuum cleaners, and new kitchen gadgets promised easier housework. Food culture shifted throughout the decade. Wartime meant simple meals stretched to feed families on rations. Casseroles became standard because they combined small amounts of meat with vegetables and starches. Spam, though mocked, was a reliable protein. After rationing ended, abundance returned. Supermarkets expanded, offering variety that had seemed impossible during the war. Processed foods promised convenience. Cake mixes and frozen dinners began appearing on shelves. The American diet was changing. Childhood in the 1940s meant growing up fast. Children understood sacrifice because they lived it. They helped with victory gardens, participated in scrap drives, and watched fathers and older brothers leave for war. Some never saw them return. Schools incorporated the war into everything. Children learned geography by following battle maps. They wrote letters to soldiers overseas. They understood that their small sacrifices mattered. Play was simpler. Stickball in the street, jump rope on sidewalks, and radio serials after school. Toys were limited during wartime, so imagination filled the gap. Comic books provided heroes, with Superman and Captain America fighting alongside American soldiers. What defined America in the 1940s was transformation through crisis and the emergence that followed. The war demanded everything from ordinary people, and they delivered. Women proved their capabilities. Families sacrificed together. A nation unified around common purpose. The post-war years brought new challenges and new hope. Soldiers returned to build families. Suburbs spread across former farmland. The baby boom began. America emerged as a global superpower, confident and prosperous. For those who lived through the 1940s, it was a decade that demanded sacrifice, then delivered reward. The hardship created bonds that lasted lifetimes. The victory created optimism that shaped generations. For those with memories of this remarkable era in American history, there is always more to explore.